Hello everyone, peace be upon you. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, and stay with me until the end of the story. Also, leave a comment telling me which city and country you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my story has reached. For those of you who have already subscribed, I sincerely wish you good health, ease in all your affairs, abundant blessings, and may all your hopes and dreams come true. Amen. Now, let's begin the story. Fort Hamilton Joint Operations Center in Anchorage wasn't built to look beautiful. It was built to move information at the speed of consequence. Screens glowed along the walls, a low hum of climate systems filled the gaps between clipped conversations, and the carpet still carried the sharp scent of solvent from a midnight cleaning nobody noticed. Uniforms moved in clusters, Army greens, Navy blues, Air Force blues, a spatter of Marine crimson and brass, each thread telegraphing rank, billets, and history. In the middle of that theater, a single person looked like static on a broadcast, a woman in civilian clothes, hair pulled back, posture relaxed, eyes never still. Catherine Donovan, cat to the few who'd earned it, read a tablet in the front row usually reserved for command staff. No name tape. No rack of ribbons. Just a small, flat plastic badge clipped to her lapel, the kind admin assistants wore to get into printer rooms. She checked the room like she was checking weather, vent flow, door swing, field of view, exit paths, weak corners. Calm without effort. Silent without apology. Anchorage outside was gray and slushy, the kind of late winter day that makes the world feel wrapped in wet wool. Inside, the energy ran hot. Briefing for a joint exercise, classified enough to lock phones in pouches and bring out the polite smiles people use when they don't know who's holding the real keys. A few rows back, Ensign Ryan Callahan watched the woman with the badge and felt the itch young officers get when something looks out of place. Habit had trained him to love the clean lines of protocol. Anomalies weren't invitations to be curious, they were nails sticking out of the deck. You hammered them down. Zephyr Blackwell, immaculate even when pretending not to care, drifted near the aisle like a man expecting applause. He carried his lineage like a tailored jacket, never wrinkled, never surrendered to a chair. On the far side, Lieutenant Colonel Amara Collins stood shoulder to shoulder with Colonel Robert Ridley, low voices under the noise, both of them reading the room the way experienced people do, by chasing the silence, not the sound. The hall settled by degrees. A tech adjusted the projector throw. A captain whispered that the agenda would slip because the weather had iced the airfield. Someone laughed too loudly at a joke about PowerPoint. Ryan's gaze kept snagging on the badge. No unit crest. No DoD eagle. No colored stripe for interim clearances. Visitor, maybe. Contractor, likely. Command row, never. He moved down the aisle with the tidy confidence that had gotten him through Annapolis and into Intel early, the kind that looks like arrogance if you don't know the hours behind it. He put on the mild smile he used for hotel clerks and new lieutenants. "Ma'am," he said, just loud enough for the nearby rows to hear him without it sounding like a performance. "That section is reserved for command staff." He let his eyes flick to the badge, a quick, trained check, then back to her face. "Observer seating is in the back. I can show you." Kat looked up like he'd interrupted a documentary she didn't mind pausing. No surprise. No fluster. The pause stretched a beat longer than polite. She nodded once, not moving. Ryan felt the air change, the way it shifts when a door opens somewhere behind you. In the rear, Zephyr's attention sharpened, amusement in the angle of his mouth. A few shoulders turned, the way crowds turn when they sense a small scene might bloom into a story they can retell at lunch. Kareem Nazari, headset crooked around his neck, watched with a slantwise grin that said he'd seen variations of this dance before and the tune was always the same. Kat's eyes dropped to her watch, then back to her tablet. Ryan stood there half a breath too long. He picked up her badge between two fingers like he was examining an artifact. Flat plastic, no weight. He let it fall back against her lapel with a soft click. "This doesn't grant access to classified briefings," he said, voice still pleasant, edge tucked just under the velvet. "Security will notice." "I'm trying to help." From 3 rows up, someone chuckled. The chuckle grew legs. Laughter travels fast when uniforms feel safe. Zephyr shifted closer, hands behind his back, the instructional tone already primed. "Ensign," he said, addressing Ryan but aiming his voice at the audience, "you're correct. This section is for combat personnel. Let's maintain standards." Kat didn't turn. Didn't bite. Didn't deliver the line that would make it a duel. She breathed like she had all the oxygen in the room to herself. Imara's jaw flexed, eyes narrowing, not at Ryan, not at Kat, but at the geometry of the moment, like a mathematician spotting an equation pretending to be a coincidence. Ridley's gaze drifted to the door, then to the catwalk above the stage, then back to Kat's hands. Everything about her posture said, present, contained, waiting. Anchorage's light leaked through the high windows in thin sheets. A logistics officer fumbled a stack of folders. The projector stuttered and settled on a frozen map of the Hindu Kush that meant nothing to anyone who hadn't bled on stones like those. Ryan cleared his throat, ready to close the loop, move the anomaly to the back row, restore the seam of order. The room smelled faintly of coffee that had been hot an hour ago. He tried again, softer. "Ma'am, this is for your own," he didn't finish. He didn't need to. The door at the back opened on a gust of cold, and the kind of stillness that follows a drop tray spread across the floor. Heads turned not because of the sound but because the air changed direction. Dark suits. Earpieces. Purpose that doesn't apologize. They didn't walk, they flowed, forming angles that turned space into lanes and lanes into barriers. The first 2 took the aisle. The third and fourth set the perimeter. The 5th and 6th looked like the kind of men who never had to say please. Ryan's mouth closed. Zephyr's chin tilted a degree downward, eyes narrowing to a fine smile. Imara exhaled like a tension wire giving back an inch. Ridley didn't move at all. The civilians didn't glance at anyone else. They made a straight line for the front row, toward the woman with the paperweight badge and the weathercheck eyes. Before anyone spoke, the room had already rearranged itself. Rank clears space. Authority bends it. The suits did both. A tech tried to step forward and found himself redirected with a gentle hand that held iron. A captain reached for his ID out of reflex and then let his hand fall, as if remembering that the badge on your chest doesn't always win the argument. Kat rose, not fast, not slow, like she'd been timing her breath to the sweep of the second hand. She set the tablet on the chair, the screen going to sleep without protest. Ryan heard his own pulse. He told himself this was a misunderstanding, a VIP mix-up, a visiting senator's staffer with delusions of gravity. He told himself that because it was easier than admitting the obvious, he hadn't been reading a situation, he'd been reading a costume. Up front, the podium mic popped. A staffer whispered into a sleeve. The projector blinked and returned to a blue screen waiting for orders. Somewhere down the corridor, a door opened and closed with the decisiveness of someone who didn't open doors unless there was a reason. Kat didn't smile. She didn't look at Ryan. She checked her watch one more time like she was aligning to a schedule none of them had been invited to see. The suits tightened their formation, hands easy, eyes hard. People straightened without knowing why. Anchorage weather pressed against the windows. The JOC held its breath. The briefing hadn't started, but the room already knew the headline. The most ordinary badge in the building belonged to the most dangerous calm in the room. And in that stretched, electric quiet before names and clearances were spoken out loud, Fort Hamilton did what all good rooms do when they sense a shift in gravity. It leaned toward the center and waited to find out who, exactly, it had been underestimating. The rear doors cracked again and a hush swept the hall like someone turned the volume knob to 0. The agents tightened their ring, shoulders squaring, eyes cutting lanes no one dared to cross. Then General Victor Dalton entered with the kind of quiet that makes a room stand up straighter before the brain catches up. No pomp. No entourage beyond a single aide with a folder and a face built for bad news. Dalton didn't scan the crowd. He walked a straight line to the front row and stopped in front of the woman with the nothing badge. "Major Donovan," he said, voice level, carrying without strain. "Apologies for the delay. The president is standing by for your assessment." A ripple moved across the audience, shock, denial, recalculation, like heat shimmering off tarmac. Ryan felt the bottom drop out of his certainty, a clean, cold tilt that left his hands a fraction too empty. Zephyr's smirk collapsed into something flatter, then smoothed over as if nothing had happened. Professionals edit expressions for a living. Imara didn't blink. Ridley's chin dipped a millimeter, the closest he ever came to "I told you so." Dalton turned to the room. "For those not yet read in, this is Major Catherine Donovan. You know her work even if you don't know her name. Need to know applies. It still applies after this briefing." He let the weight of that settle, then moved aside like a curtain being drawn from a stage. Kat stepped to the podium without victory in her stride and without apology in her breath. She tapped the console. The screen woke to a layered map of mountains, corridors, frequency diagrams, red zones that meant choke points, blue arcs that meant hope. "Operation Kingfisher," she said, clear and unhurried. "Objective: extraction of a high-value asset with time-sensitive intelligence regarding coordinated strikes against U.S. personnel and partners. Window closes in 72 hours. Denied terrain, hostile counterintelligence footprint, active electronic warfare. Questions come at the end. For now, listen." She spoke like she built the plan from the bones outward. Insertion profiles. Altitude sickness contingencies. Radio silence methods when silence is a tell. Contested evac routes that become decoys the moment they're named. On the third slide she described a jamming architecture that would eat lesser teams whole. On the fifth she cut it open and showed the places it could bleed. The room, stacked with people who weren't easy to impress, leaned forward as one organism hungry for oxygen. Ryan caught fragments between the pounding in his ears. Not the jargon, he knew that language, but the cadence. The tiny pivots where a leader telegraphs the difference between confidence and certainty. He watched her hands, still when stillness signaled control, moving only to point at what mattered. He remembered picking up her badge like a museum docent and felt heat crawl up his neck. Zephyr asked for the floor with a smooth flick of his wrist that assumed it would be granted. "Major," he said, formal, the crispness of a man pulling his uniform tighter. "For clarity, your credentials today did not indicate." "They indicated exactly what they needed to," Kat said, not unkind, not soft. "Credentials are tools. You don't swing a wrench at every problem just because you like the weight." The line set a few smiles on edge. Zephyr's did not join them. She continued. "Team composition. Skill sets required. Language, signals, medical, mountain. This will be 8 personnel. I will select them." She didn't look at Ryan, which made it worse. "We operate out of Fort Hamilton for prep, jump from a forward location, and stage contingencies at Denali Safe House. Questions now." Silence, then a colonel asked something safe about air assets. A commander asked something safer about rules of engagement. Imara raised 2 points that weren't questions so much as warnings disguised as courtesy, and Kat logged them with a nod that said she'd already built those bridges and burned them behind her to keep the path clean. When it ended, Dalton stepped up again and closed the loop with a handful of sentences that moved money, aircraft, and authority. The agents relaxed by degrees. Chairs creaked. The spell broke, not all at once but in gentle fractures. People lined up to introduce themselves to the person they had mistaken for a misplaced printer tech. Kat took names with a firm shake, a brief eye contact, and a mental ledger none of them would ever see. Ryan didn't move. He could join the line and pretend this was normal, or he could leave and pretend he had somewhere urgent to be. He did neither until the room thinned and the agents widened a gap just enough for him to step through. "Major," he said, standing at attention because a script is useful when your instincts have embarrassed you. "Ma'am, I owe you a formal apology for." "Ensign Callahan," she said, tone neutral, eyes on the tablet as if reading a weather report only she could see. "Your record shows advanced workups in cryptographic systems, adversarial architectures, and Devilian framework familiarity. Accurate?" He blinked. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Be in the tactical room at 0600. Station 3. She lifted her eyes, weighed him with the efficiency of a scale. "This operation needs your skills, not your assumptions." "Yes, ma'am," he said, because there was nothing else to say that wouldn't be vanity dressed up as contrition. She nodded once and turned to the next officer waiting to sell their usefulness. In the corridor, the fluorescent buzz sounded louder than usual. Ryan walked like distance could solve shame. At the end of the hallway, a window framed the gray smear of Anchorage, snow trying to decide if it wanted to be sleet. He pressed his palm against the cool glass and saw his reflection, a man who liked rules because they served as rails, and who had just learned that rails are helpful until the mission needs you to step off them and keep your balance anyway. Behind him, Zephyr's baritone slid into place. "Tough morning, Ensign," he said, sympathy arranged carefully along the vowels. Pro tip. Know when to speak and when to stand aside. Today you spoke. Ryan turned. "Yes, sir." Zephyr's smile was surgical. "Don't make a habit of it in my lane." Imara's voice cut in from the junction like a lifeline disguised as a reprimand. "Callahan. Tomorrow. Early means 15 minutes before the time the major gave you. Don't be smart. Be on time." She didn't wait for a reply. Ridley's nod followed, more commandment than comfort. Ryan checked his watch. He had less than 20 hours to become the kind of man who could look a mistake in the eye and not blink. Somewhere above the cloud line, a plan was already in motion. Down here in the fluorescent hum and recycled air, he started with the only step that mattered. He wrote his apology in the language of competence. And at 0600, there would be no badge to misread, no audience to impress, just a console, a problem that wanted to be solved, and a leader who would know if he was the kind of officer worth the risk of bringing into the fire. So at 0600 there was no badge to misread, no audience to impress, just that console, that problem, and that leader who would know if he was worth the risk. The tactical room was colder than the hallway and brighter than comfort. Screens stacked data like it was a living thing, spectral plots, linked budgets, error correction traces, each window a vein that could clot the mission if ignored. Kat was already there with Rebecca Foster, the only civilian who looked like she could ask a 4-star to speak up. Imara stood over a satellite feed, Ridley tracked logistics in a quiet corner, and the hum of equipment blended with the soft metronome of practiced breathing. Ryan took Station 3 and signed into a network that greeted him like a locked door waiting for the right knock. Devilian framework signatures weren't on the front page, they hid in traffic that pretended to be useless, the way good liars use the truth as camouflage. He built a model in silence and let his mind chew through it. No grandstanding. No commentary. He noted a decoy vulnerability, ignored the bait, chased the carrier wave instead, found a harmonics bleed that didn't belong, and tagged it with the kind of calm you earn only after being wrong in public. Kat drifted behind him without announcing rank. "That's the real one," she said, not praise, not surprise. Just a confirmation that the path existed and he was on it. Document it. Build a countermeasure profile with 3 clocked pivots. We'll lose the first 2 by design. He worked. Time thinned. The room reset every hour on the hour with a short stand-up, threats, changes, constraints. Rebecca seeded updates from sources she wouldn't name. Imara translated atmospherics into practical warnings, who would twitch, who would bite, who would watch. Ridley asked for less gear and got more, asked for more time and got less, then reshuffled the deck without complaint. Kareem wrangled comms, said nothing when people forgot he'd be the one to make their voices exist on the other end of the world. Marcus ran medical plans like a mechanic prepping engines for a race no one wanted to watch. David Okafor handled the kit like it was an extension of his bones. Zephyr stayed mostly out of the room, orbiting the periphery with the restless grace of a man allergic to not being central. When he did appear, it was to ask polished questions that suggested the answers he wanted, the kind you file under optics. Kat gave him economy, not fuel. Dalton appeared exactly twice, both times to move obstacles that had been treated like fixtures. By mid-afternoon, the outline of Kingfisher had weight. 8 bodies. 2 chalks if they had to split. Insertion path cold and high, halo over stones that had shredded better boots. Primary extraction route marked in blue, secondary in paler blue that lied about the danger. Denali safehouse set for a 12-hour spin-up window. Seattle on standby for liaison backhaul, Tacoma for comms escrow, Los Alamos for a classified module that arrived in a nondescript crate guarded like inconvenient royalty. Ryan briefed his piece without drama, hands steady, voice flat in the way good information is flat. He showed the decoy layer, then the bleed, then the countermeasure. He explained the timing gates like streetlights you don't run unless you want to get seen by the wrong camera. Kat watched with the same unchanging focus she'd used on the map. Imara asked 2 questions that cut fat cleanly. Rebecca scribbled a line that looked like nothing until you realized it was a phone number disguised as geometry. Approval came not as applause but as the absence of correction. They moved to range drills, not because anyone expected to shoot their way out, but because hope is not a plan and plans still need teeth. Anchorage coughed snow that couldn't commit. Breath hung in clouds, steel rang once, then not at all. David flowed through doorways that didn't exist, turning corners that weren't there, proving to gravity that rules were preferences. Marcus timed tourniquet drills to his own heartbeat. Kareem tuned radios until silence meant ready. Ryan ran the jamming timeline against muscle memory because in a fight your hands should know the truth before your head does. Zephyr cornered Ryan near the armory door, the smile back in place like it had never left. "I see the Major found a use for you," he said, voice friendly enough to be mistaken for mentorship. "Remember that one correct analysis does not erase one public misstep. People remember the theater." Ryan nodded. "Yes, sir." He didn't add that theater had nearly kept him from seeing the work. He didn't add anything. He went back to the console and let the code remind him what mattered. Night folded into morning without bothering to tell anyone. They ate standing up, drank coffee that tasted like a dare, and cut their plans thinner until nothing extra clung to them. Dalton came with final authorization that sounded like a door unlatching. "You jump at 0300, he said. "Weather window is narrow. Don't chase it. Own it." Kat assembled the 8 in the gear bay, no speech, no crescendo. Just the checklist that keeps people breathing. She looked at each face and in that look hung a contract older than paper. "This is not about proving anything," she said. "This is about doing exactly what we prepared to do. If the plan breaks, and it will, at some point, you break clean and move to the next one. If you get clever, you tell someone you're getting clever. If you get scared, you say so. Fear is information. We use information. Helmets on. Gloves adjusted. Parachutes checked by hands that had checked thousands and still didn't trust the 1001st. The aircraft groaned like an old friend getting off a couch. Anchorage shrank to a map, then a memory. The hold smelled like jet fuel and the strange sweet of anxiety metabolizing into intent. Marcus clapped Kareem's shoulder. David tapped the bulkhead twice, then once more like punctuation. Imara closed her eyes and opened them again looking sharper. Ridley strapped down the last case with a knot you couldn't read but you could trust. Ryan watched Kat in the edge light of the cargo bay, the calm that had overturned a room now compressed into focus so dense it felt like gravity. He realized the thing that had looked like stillness was motion with all the waste removed. He checked his rig one more time and didn't apologize for the repetition. Rebecca's voice crackled in Kat's ear for the final time before the blackout period, a last thread tying two worlds. Asset movement confirmed. Hostile sea elements active North Ridge. Jamming probable within 3 mics of LZ. See you on the other side. Kat answered with a click, nothing wasted. The ramp yawned open on cold, black air and a horizon that was more idea than line. Wind roared in, grabbed words and threw them somewhere no one could retrieve them. The jumpmaster pointed, crisp, absolute. Green sparked like permission. Ryan's heart settled into a beat he recognized from exams, from competitions, from nights alone at desks. But this rhythm carried other people with it now. He stepped to the edge behind David, in front of Marcus, close enough to feel the pulse of the plan inside the skin of the plane. The world outside was an engine of dark and frost and space. Kat glanced back once, not to inspire, not to reassure, but to confirm that the count matched the names in her head. 8. She turned, leaned into the wind, and fell with the authority of someone who knew falling was only flying with intent. Ryan followed, the cold grabbing his face and erasing everything that wasn't the work, the timing, the next breath. The sky opened like a problem daring him to solve it before the ground added its own unforgiving opinion. Ryan counted breaths and seconds, then let training cash its checks. Canopy snapped, lines sang, and cold bit through the seams that gear never fully seals. Below, the Hindu Kush lay like a map carved by a stubborn god, ridges stacked tight, ravines dark as shut eyes, a scatter of corrugated roofs pretending to be harmless. He drifted to the rendezvous mark, collapsed the chute, packed it to ground, and moved. No chatter. Comms dark until they weren't. Kat's voice finally cut into the net, low and clipped. Check in. 1. Imara. 2. David. 3. Kareem. 4. Marcus. 5. Ridley. 6. Ryan. 7. Another operator Kat had folded in without ceremony. 8. Kat herself. Numbers meant bodies, bodies meant forward. They threaded the rocks like they had rehearsed in a warehouse with tape for walls and cones for cover. Real stone was less forgiving. Air smelled like dust that remembered the last 10 wars. A shepherd's dog barked twice and didn't bark again. Ahead, the asset's beacon whispered on and off, as if it knew the difference between wanting to be found and needing to survive. They made the pickup fast, not clean. Nothing is clean at that altitude. The asset, thinner than the file photo and carrying eyes that had slept around danger for years, gave the prearranged phrase and got the counterphrase back. Kareem confirmed voice. Imara confirmed details only 3 people were supposed to know. The asset nodded like he'd been holding his head still for weeks. You're late, he said, not ungrateful. You're alive, Kat said. Move. The exfil route looked honest on the tablet. On the ground, honesty cracked in the first 100 yards. Contacts on the ridge, 2, then 4, then the kind of cluster that meant someone had sold a piece of air to the highest bidder. Suppressed fire stitched the rocks. David answered with a rhythm that turned a bad angle into a better one. Marcus pulled Nazari behind cover when a chip of stone opened the skin on his cheek. Ridley called distance and direction like he was ordering parts in a machine shop. Imara adjusted pace so the slowest runner never became a stationary target. Kat did math with space and seconds and made it look like instinct. Then the comms began to fuzz. Not a cut, worse. A smear. Words turned to mud, bearings to rumor. Ryan felt it in his ears at the same moment the scope of his console lit up in his head from all the rehearsal. Jamming architecture, he said into the net, keeping his voice flat so fear couldn't grow teeth in it. North building. Wide front, dirty carriers. I can burn through for a window if I get close. Distance? Kat asked. 70 meters exposed, he said, already tracing the path with his eyes, already feeling the weight of the countermeasure kit in his pack like a decision. "Copy," Kat said. "We'll paint the lane." She didn't tell him no. She didn't tell him to wait for a prettier option that didn't exist. On my mark. They prepared the world the way professionals do, quietly, decisively. David set a rhythm of fire that made heads duck at the right beats. Imara put rounds where whispers told her someone would be. Ridley shifted position to force an angle. Kareem pushed just enough signal through the gunk to give them a count. Marcus checked his own breath because medics who forget to breathe tend to have patients who stop breathing too. "Mark," Kat said. Ryan moved. Low, fast, legs burning as if cold had turned to acid. Stones jumped at his feet where bullets kissed them. He felt air tear along his jaw, a hot slap and the metallic taste of blood. It didn't slow him. He reached the slab of the north building and let the wall give him a second of borrowed safety. Gloves off, kit out, mind smaller than a box with wires and switches. He tuned to the bleed he'd found in Anchorage, caught its rhythm like a song stuck in your head, and built a counterbeat. First pivot, let them notice. Second, let them think it's working. Third, cut the throat. Window, Kareem grunted as the net cleared in a sudden snap. "We're up." 4 minutes. "Move," Kat ordered. The team edged the asset through the gap like a thread through a needle. Fire came in pulses, then in waves. The primary route collapsed under boots they didn't own. Kat didn't flinch. "Secondary," she said. "West corridor to the drainage." They were 3 turns from the tunnel when the tunnel chewed itself into a dead end of sandbags and the kind of doors that don't open to strangers. The enemy adjusted fast, good enemies do. A burst took Nazari in the shoulder and spun him into Marcus's arms. The medic's voice went clinical, the way voices do when the heart pretends to step out of the way of the hands. "Through and through. He's bleeding. I can keep him, not carry him." Protocol said objective over personnel. Protocol is smart. Protocol doesn't have to watch men die. Ryan made the decision before he remembered it was a decision. "Holding," he said, already doubling back. "I'm with Quillen and Nazari." "Negative," Kat said, steel wrapped in thread. "Proceed to LZ." "With respect," he said, the words crisp as breaking glass, "we don't leave our people." Silence shaped itself into consent. "Acknowledged," Kat said. "I'm en route to you." "Imara, take the asset." "Ridley, cover." "Kareem, keep the line alive." "David, make them regret breathing." The corridor turned into a lesson in improvisation. Ryan and Marcus rigged a makeshift drag with straps and good intentions. Nazari bit down and stayed conscious out of spite. Fire pressed them to the threshold of panic, discipline pressed back harder. Footsteps thundered close that weren't theirs. Ryan tasted iron and drywall and the second-hand adrenaline of people who are in pain and still moving. 10 seconds to lose the bird, the pilot said in their ears, voice flat because pilots don't get paid to have feelings. "We make it," Kat said, appearing at Ryan's shoulder like she had teleported through a sheet of lead. She grabbed the improvised stretcher, took more weight than physics suggested, and steered the mess toward light. 5 meters from the LZ, the world narrowed to rotor wash, grit, and the wind that smells like rescue if you get to it in time. Enemy fire peaked into the kind of frenzy that comes right before an opponent convinces themselves they can still win. Ryan felt a hit hammer his back and waited for pain that didn't come. It wasn't a bullet. It was Kat, driving him forward with a shove that traded her position for his. She turned, planted, and sent controlled fire downrange with the steadiness she'd used to turn a room of skeptics into students. They spilled onto the skid in a tumble of limbs and gear. Marcus hauled Nazari in with a grunt that sounded like a prayer he didn't believe in but used anyway. David backed in last, firing until the angle stopped existing. Imara's voice cut across the chaos from the perimeter, asset aboard. And then she was, too, boots slamming metal, hands grabbing straps. Ridley folded in like a hinge that knew exactly when to close. "Go," Kat said to the pilot, her voice unchanged, as if she were ordering coffee. The helicopter leapt. Rounds chased them and fell away. The valley unwound beneath like a tape on fast forward. Inside the cabin, noise filled every inch, but the shape of survival asserted itself in small things. Marcus's hand steady on pressure, Kareem's headset tilted just so, David's foot braced for recoil that wouldn't come again, Amara counting heartbeats without touching a wrist. Ryan met Kat's eyes across the cabin. She looked exactly as she had in the briefing room, present, contained, already doing the math for the next phase because the work doesn't end when you outrun the first disaster. He tasted blood, touched his jaw, and felt the sting that would become a scar if he kept it. He didn't apologize. He didn't thank her. There would be time for words later or there wouldn't. Either way, the only language that mattered right now was altitude, fuel, and distance to a horizon that had stopped trying to kill them for the moment. Behind them, the jamming sight flickered back to life, angry the trick had ended. Ahead, the secondary LZ drew itself onto the map as a promise. Between those points, 8 people and 1 asset breathed in a rhythm that said, "Not done, not safe, not proud, just moving." And in that narrow strip where consequence lives, the lesson finished writing itself. Authority is quiet, courage is built in small decisions, and respect is not a speech, it's a shove that puts someone else closer to the door when the bullets start arguing with gravity. The bird shouldered the air, climbed hard, and shoved the valley into the past. For a minute, the only proof they were alive was the inventory of noise, rotors howling, metal rattling, wind clawing at seams. Marcus's voice threaded through it like a line thrown across a river. "Nazari's pressure's holding. 2 minutes and I can risk a lighter wrap." Kareem didn't answer, his eyes were on the panel, watching link margins converge like a heartbeat finding rhythm again. Kat stayed kneeling by the ramp, body between the team and the open mouth of the world, until the pilot gave her the altitude she wanted. Then she slid forward, checked each face fast, small nods that looked like nothing and felt like permission to keep breathing. The asset sat with shoulders square and hands on his knees, not disguising the tremor or apologizing for it. He had given everything that mattered and had one thing left, staying still. "Fuel to Denali." Ridley called over the roar. "Enough with greed left over," the pilot replied. "Weather's a cat's cradle, but we've got the scissors." No one wasted a smile on that. Relief is a luxury you buy with distance. The mountains finally exhaled them into a sky that, while still hostile, agreed to a truce. Ryan leaned back against the bulkhead and let his head touch the metal, jaw throbbing where the round had written its argument across his skin. He reassembled the last 10 minutes and filed them under the only label that fit, done, but not finished. They dropped into the Denali safehouses clearing like a stone choosing its place in a stream. Snow burst up around the skids, then settled as if embarrassed. The cold bit in new places as they piled out, ankles, palms, the space between ribs where the body stores panic. Ground team hustled them inside with the efficient warmth of people who focus on action because words feel clumsy at altitude. Inside smelled like coffee and gun oil and wool. Heat pressed the chill out of their bones. Marcus took Nazari straight to a cot under bright, unforgiving light. Through and through, he repeated for the recorders that would later build paperwork out of survival. Debride, irrigate, wrap, monitor. Stable if the gods are in a mood. Kareem managed a grim line that would count as a grin later. Imara parked the asset at a table with water and a blanket, then began the kind of questioning that doesn't bruise but leaves marks anyway. Names, routes, code words, frequencies. The asset gave it in a steady stream, voice cracking only when he reached the part where soon became now in the plan he had risked everything to smuggle out. Rebecca's voice came in tight over the secure line, confirmation tags, cross cues, the sound of a network turning raw intel into levers. In Seattle, somebody would plug this into a board and watch dominoes that had been designed never to fall begin to lean. Ryan cleaned gear, then cleaned it again, because hands need work after chaos if they're going to learn from it. David sat on a bench with his rifle across his knees, not touching it, just letting his breathing fall back into a human cadence. Ridley found the logistics closet and turned it into order. No one asked him to, and no one stopped him. The plane that would take them the rest of the way home wouldn't arrive for hours, and time began to expand back into its regular shape. Kat made her rounds without announcements. She checked Marcus's wrap and Kareem's color and the asset's pulse. She checked the window, the curtain, the latch. She checked Ryan last, not because he was least urgent but because she knew he would hold until the line slackened. "How's the jaw?" she asked. "Hurts," he said. "Feels like I earned it." "Painkillers make liars of smart people," she said. "Don't get clever until the paperwork's signed." It was almost a joke. Almost. He looked at her and saw the same calm that had pulled them through the noise. "You shoved me," he said, matter of fact. "I needed you ahead of me," she said, more matter of fact. "You had a job only you could do if we got hit again. I had a job any of us could finish. That's leadership math." "Copy," he said, and let the arithmetic rewrite the last sharp edge of shame into something cleaner. Responsibility carried forward. By afternoon, the safe house felt like a ship in a harbor watching the storm unwind its anger farther out. The asset finished his initial dump and slumped against the chair back. Imara put a hand on his shoulder, human permission to be tired. Rebecca's updates accelerated, words like intercepts, tasking, green light, moving the air around the room. Dalton came over the line once, short, full of gravity. "Package received. Fallout manageable. Prepare for movement." Marcus announced the part everyone needed to hear. "Nazari's stable. I want him at a hospital yesterday, but we've bought the ticket." Kareem pretended to complain and failed. Gratitude sat too large in the space between his words. David cracked a knuckle and then another, then relaxed like a machine easing out of gear. Twilight arrived with the soft authority of Alaska in winter. The world turned blue, then darker, then quiet. Outside, snow traded places with wind. Inside, the team devolved into the simple tasks of living that remind the body it belongs to the rest of you. Someone made more coffee. Someone else burned toast and nobody cared. The asset slept like a man let out of a locked room. Ryan found himself alone by the rear door, the frame cold against his shoulder, watching trees breathe. He replayed the jump, the run, the wall, the kit, the pivots, seeing the one place he could have shaved a second and deciding not to punish himself for a second he couldn't get back. Footsteps stopped behind him. "Kat. If I had told you to stand down back there," she said, not looking at him, "would you have?" "Yes," he said. Then added, "because it mattered, and I would have argued later." "Good," she said. "You knew the difference between courage and impulse today. Don't forget it just because painkillers make the world feel fuzzy." He almost smiled. "I haven't taken them yet." "Then don't get brave," she said, and left him with the trees. The flight out felt longer than the flight in, probably because peace stretches time even as exhaustion tries to shrink it. Anchorage welcomed them with sodium lights and wet tarmac, the prosaic details of civilization that always feel like a miracle after places where roads are rumors. Fort Hamilton received them with the careful choreography of secrecy, agents who looked tired without showing it, forms that signed themselves if you stared at them the right way, doors that opened to people rather than badges. Debrief began, as it always does, before anyone said the word. The room was smaller than the briefing hall, the table scarred, the coffee better. Dalton stood at the head and did not congratulate them. He acknowledged, which lands deeper when you've learned to translate. The asset's information led to preemptive actions across multiple theaters. Disruption is ongoing. Your work shifted a line that needed shifting. He turned to Kat. "Anything for the record? We don't put people in positions where the protocol is at odds with the ethic," she said. "If the plan requires leaving someone, we wrote the wrong plan." It wasn't a rebuke. It was a note in the margin of a doctrine someone would read later and pretend they always believed. After, the team bled back into their corners of the building. Marcus took Nazari toward medevac. A nurse with a weary smile took over the part of the story that involved stitches and patience. Kareem lifted a hand that could have been a salute or a wave or a promise. David vanished the way quiet men do, by stepping into a shadow and letting it claim him without ceremony. Imara walked the asset to the next set of hands and came back lighter by a burden she hadn't admitted to carrying. Ryan stayed back, waiting without trying to look like he was waiting. Kat gathered her files into neat stacks, the ritual of completion. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said, choosing words like tools, "I owe you." "You already paid," she said. "At the wall. At the console. At the corridor when you said the thing no one wants to say out loud. Learn the right lesson." He nodded. "The lesson is don't advertise authority, enact it. That's one. Here's another," she said. "Respect is not deference. It's precision. It's showing up where you're needed and not where you're comfortable." He felt the shape of that settle in his chest. Understood. She slid a thin folder toward him. Orders. Transfers live in plain Manila because drama is for people who don't have to do the work. You report to a development group next month, she said. You'll have to learn new ways to be useful and new ways to be quiet. He looked up, too fast to smother the surprise. Yes, ma'am. Don't thank me, she said. Make it worth the administrative headache. He almost laughed. I'll try not to be a headache. Try to be necessary, she corrected, and the corner of her mouth moved 0.5 millimeter, which, from her, was a party. The building emptied by degrees. Somewhere far from that room, decisions were being made that relied on the data they had pried loose from rock and fear. Somewhere else, people who would never know their names would wake up safer than they had been yesterday. That math never balances in public. It doesn't need to. Ryan stepped outside into Anchorage night. The air cut clean, the sky pretended to be simple. His jaw throbbed in time with his pulse. He touched the fresh line that would stitch him to this day and felt no need to assign it meaning beyond the one it offered, a reminder. Kat joined him, not close, not far. Get sleep, she said. Then write your report like you're not afraid of it being read. I'm not, he said, and realized it was true. Shame had burned off into something steadier, accountability. They stood there a moment more, listening to the quiet that follows storms you outlived. The wind moved, soft as a hand smoothing wrinkled paper. Somewhere inside, a printer coughed out an order that would set the next day in motion. Out here, two figures breathed the same cold and watched their own exhale curl and vanish. The mission was over in the way missions end when their effects are just beginning. And in that in-between, with frost needling the edge of the night and the taste of jet fuel still faint on the tongue, they both felt the same simple truth: survival is not the finale, it's the invoice. Payment continues, in reports, in training, in 100 quiet choices no one will post on a wall or pin to a chest. Tomorrow would bring medals or it wouldn't. Either way, the only direction that mattered was forward meant paperwork, stitches, and a room that smelled like toner where people signed their names to versions of the truth that would age into history. It meant Ryan waking before his alarm because sleep didn't feel earned until the report was done. He wrote it the way Kat had told him to, like he wasn't afraid of it being read, each sentence a clean edge, no excuses wrapped in jargon, no heroics stuffed between the lines. He logged the moment he hesitated, the second he shaved, the shove he received, the countermeasure he timed by breath, and the way fear behaved when given a job. He signed his name and let the printer spit out the record of a day that would never be public. Fort Hamilton shifted back into its normal rhythm, which is to say it kept secrets while looking busy. Marcus checked on Nazari twice a day and brought back the kind of updates that fit in a nod. Kareem learned to sleep without flinching when doors clicked. David vanished into training blocks that had no titles, then reappeared like a fact you forgot you knew. Imara sat in small rooms with big maps and traced ripples from the assets intel as they bumped into plans with other names. Ridley cleaned a gear cage that didn't belong to him because order is a way some people say thank you. Ceremonies, when they come, don't announce themselves with trumpets. They just appear on a calendar with a time and a location and an assumption that you'll be there wearing the right uniform. The hall was dressed differently than on briefing day, flags sharp, brass brighter, chairs set in ranks that made sense to people who had earned the right to read them. Families sat in a back row reserved for those who love without access. Agents stood like furniture that might move if it had to. The air held a hush that wasn't fear and wasn't awe, it was respect for the cost of precision. General Dalton spoke first because sometimes the person who moves obstacles gets to say the nouns out loud. He didn't tell a story. He counted the results. Threats disrupted. Timelines broken. Lives that would never know they were saved carrying on with errands and arguments. He called names. When he said, Lieutenant Kareem Nazari, Marcus angled himself so his patient could see the stage without moving too much. When he said, Ensign Ryan Callahan, Ryan felt his spine remember all the instructors who had told him posture was a language, and he spoke it. Kat stood off to the side, uniform crisp, eyes steady, decorations finally visible because the room required them. She looked uncomfortable and praised the way divers look uncomfortable on land, functional, capable, slightly out of element. When Dalton finished, he yielded the mic without ceremony. She stepped up with the same economy she used on a problem set. No flourish. You showed up, she said to the team, not to the room. You did the work. You didn't make it louder than it needed to be. You didn't make it smaller. You told the truth in the places where lies are easy. She didn't call anyone out by name. She didn't need to. After the medals found their way to collars and cases, people drifted toward cookies and coffee because the body still wants what it wants. Ryan ended up at a table that had seen better days, looking at a tray of pastries someone had clearly fought a losing battle with plastic wrap to protect. His jaw ached in a way that meant the scar had settled into him like furniture. Kat joined him without asking. She held a glass of water like it was a prop in a play she hadn't auditioned for. You did your report right, she said. I wrote what happened, he said. Most people write what they wish had happened, she said. That's the difference between useful and pretty. We don't need pretty. He glanced at her badge, a proper one now, clipped next to rank and name. The old badge, he said, because the question had been patient for days, the flat one. It meant something. She touched the place where it had been like you touch a pocket you've checked twice. It was my mentor's, she said. She taught me that authority is not what you wear when you walk in. It's what you leave behind when you walk out. She didn't look up as she said it, and he didn't make her. Thank you for that shove, he said, the words heavier than please and lighter than an apology. I'll forget the shove, she said. Remember the decision you made before it. That's yours. He nodded once, then reached for the folder she slid toward him. Orders. The stamp said development group without saying the name everyone uses when they're trying to impress people at bars. He felt the shape of a future click into place like a magazine seating cleanly. It wasn't pride. It was responsibility layered on top of responsibility. Make it worth the headache, she said again, a line she liked because it kept ambition from growing teeth. And when you get there, watch for the person in the room who looks like they don't belong. They might be the only one who does. After the ceremony, the base returned to the hum that keeps nations intact. Ryan walked the long corridor from the hall to the exit and past a cleaner pushing a cart that squeaked every 4 feet. He thought about the first moment he had seen Kat, about a badge that looked like nothing, about laughter that travels faster than thought, and about silence that travels farther. He pushed the door bar and let Anchorage air slap him into the present. Outside, the sky had the flat, honest look of a day that would be exactly what it said it was. He could smell the ocean under the cold and the jet fuel under the ocean. He stood for a minute in the kind of quiet that doesn't fight to be heard. A text buzzed, Nazari out of surgery and complaining about the food. Ryan smiled at the screen and typed back an insult that counted as love. He didn't see Zephyr again that week, which felt like a gift wrapped in logic. He saw Amara long enough for her to hand him a flash drive and say, "Study this when you think you're too tired to learn." He saw Ridley from a distance organizing a load-bearing mess into a load-bearing system. He saw David on a treadmill running at an incline that would discourage a mountain. He saw Marcus asleep in a chair, finally, a coffee cooling on the floor beside his boot, which told Ryan more than any speech about what commitment looks like after the adrenaline goes home. On his last night before the transfer, Ryan found the tactical room empty and sat at Station 3. The monitors threw cold light across the keys. He opened the model he'd built and let the lines and frequencies play across the grid. For a second, he saw himself touching the wrong parameter, and the mission failing in a way that would have looked neat on a chart and devastating in a cabin. Then he closed the ghost's file and put the real one back on top of it. He shut it down and stood up and left the chair the way he'd found it, ready. At the door, he stopped because the habit to look back is hard to break. Kat stood in the threshold like she'd been there long enough to watch him finish. No speech. No lecture. Just a nod that said, "You belong to the work, not to the room." He nodded back and stepped into the hallway that would empty into a flight line that would empty into a runway that would point at a horizon with new lessons. The city lights blinked like ordinary miracles as he drove past. Somewhere, people were doing math for mortgages and homework for school and arguments for no good reason. Somewhere else, people were making plans to hurt them. Between those points, there were halls like Fort Hamilton and people like the ones he'd just left, turning information into time and time into distance and distance into safety. He didn't need to label it heroism to feel the weight of it. Forward, then. Not as a slogan, but as a practice. Show up. Tell the truth. Carry what's yours. Hand off what isn't. Wear the badge that's needed, not the one that flatters. And when someone mistakes quiet for small, let them. The right rooms learn. The wrong rooms don't matter. He parked, looked at the orders again, and folded them back into their envelope. The scar along his jawline tingled in the cold. It would fade to a pale line, then to a story only told if someone asked the right way. He hoped most people never would. The best parts of the work don't sound good out loud. He went inside and slept without dreams, not because his mind was empty but because it was full and had finally filed everything where it belonged. Tomorrow would require new posture, new patience, new humility. He would bring the one lesson that had rethreaded his entire sense of rank and worth: true authority doesn't announce itself. It arrives, does the job, and leaves the room quieter than it found it.